Russia just lost another very significant aircraft, as well as several other airframes that we need to talk about, in addition to more threats on the region of Transnistria and Moldova. This is being recorded on February 24th, 2024. First, I want to talk about what's going on in Transnistria because that actually kind of weaves us into the next conversation on the aircraft being downed. There's a province in Moldova called Transnistria, and you've probably heard about it, and if you have, you can skip this next little segment here. But basically, in Transnistria, the Russians have set up a breakaway province that has Russian soldiers in it that has really vied for Russian annexation at some point. In fact, Transnistria stated that its intention is to become annexed by Russia sometime in the next month. Now, I think that this is kind of an aggressive timetable to set for Transnistria, and I don't think that it would necessarily go for them or for Russia exactly how perhaps the Transnistrians think that it would go. You have to remember that this is a breakaway province of Moldova. Has created some security dilemmas, not only for Moldova and NATO, for Ukraine, because Ukraine has to have a security detail basically on that border to make sure that nothing happens that could threaten the city of Odessa or any of the other western parts of Ukraine that Russia hasn't really been able to directly impact so far in this war. Now, why this is important, right? All right, so remember that there was only 2,000 soldiers or 2,000 Russian soldiers in the province of Transnistria. That's not a lot, right? And that gives Ukraine some comfort. And of course, that gives Moldova some comfort, knowing that it's not super built up, it's not super reinforced. And so there's not really a significant threat like what you would have in the north in Kaliningrad, where there's a lot of military, right? Kaliningrad has, at least before the war, hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers in that province. Now, down in Transnistria, that's not the case. And because Transnistria is, in fact, landlocked, the only real way that Russia can access that region right now is through the air. And that is just not going to be possible for Russia in the very near term. And the reason we know that is because of this next story. Russia has lost another AWACS aircraft. It appears that an A-50 was shot down over Russia proper on the opposite end of the Sea of Azov. Now, this is a pretty significant development. The A-50s are a very high payoff target. Russia only had what was reported to be 8 or 9 of them prior to the war starting. And since the war kicked off, they've actually lost a few of them. They lost one to partisan damage in Belarus, and they had another one shot down fairly recently in the previous couple months. So all told, that could bring Russia's total stockpile of A-50s down to 6 or 7 airframes, perhaps at max. Now, this is pretty significant, all right? We're not just talking about the airframe itself and how expensive it can be to build one of those planes. That's not necessarily a problem, for a country the size of Russia. What is a problem for Russia right now is training the crews, because this is a specialized aircraft. It's a surveillance and early warning detection aircraft. It requires a crew that is not only capable of flying the thing, but is also capable of recognizing threats from a distance and communicating those threats down to ground crews and other kind of impacted individuals, right? Now, the downing of this aircraft, it also impacts the crews and the airframes of the other A-50s because, again, remember, Russia doesn't have a lot of these, but they need to maintain sufficient coverage around Ukraine, and Ukraine has a pretty large territory. I mean, the amount of land that the AWACS has to cover around Ukraine to maintain early warning capability for the soldiers in combat and along the Russian border, and if they're wanting to provide coverage for Belarus, that's a lot of time in the air. With less A-50s and with less air crews capable of going up in the air and handling these kinds of missions, that increases the demand on the other crews and the other airframes. And these airframes, remember, planes, jets, tanks, IFVs, these kinds of heavy equipment, they require a lot of maintenance. It's not just the cost of putting the thing together and having a good crew. It's about maintaining it, keeping it operational, and especially for, aircraft that can become very time and cost intensive, especially with sanctions impacting the ability of the Russian government and the Russian military to procure replacement parts. So with one A-50 down, I mean, it's not, you're not going to see the entire war change because one A-50 went down. 2 A-50s going down is a significant development, but it's not just the A-50 that went down. In fact, Russia is believed to have lost, just in the past couple of months, 2 A-50s, 5 Su-34s, 2 Su-35s, and one IL-76. The A-50 that was down yesterday is believed to be just one of a few aircraft that went down yesterday. The Ukrainians confirmed that an IL-76 was also downed in the same area, and an Su-34 crashed in the region of Kherson as well. So how exactly was this aircraft down? I mean, yes, it's a big hulking plane, fairly slow moving, not necessarily maneuverable, but it was operating over Russian territory at a pretty fair distance away from the front line. So how exactly was it taken down? Well, it appears that Ukraine, at least, and this is according to both Ukrainian confirmation sources as well as what statements out of Russia have reflected. The Ukrainians attempted to shoot it down with a modified S-200, which is a fairly old anti-aircraft system, but it does have a pretty sizable range on it. This appears to have created an alert not only on the aircraft, but with a nearby air defense crew, a Russian air defense crew. And so the Russian crew attempted to shoot the S-200 missile in flight, but may have mistakenly hit the A-50. This is not just something that we can see from both Ukrainian and Russian statements, but we can see that from the way that Ukraine confirmed that it was responsible for the attack, and how Ukraine had later stated that it had shot the aircraft down with a modified S-200. But the Russians also immediately came out and stated that they had accidentally shot it down themselves. Now, there's some, incentive on the Russian end to say that they shot it down because, of course, they're wanting to save some face. It's better it's your own mistake than it's the enemy's capabilities that are surpassing, your own capability, or at least, surpassing your ability to protect your own forces. So really, that's kind of why you would have, the Russians claiming that they shot it down, really just without any facts coming out, but also with the Ukrainians taking credit. Now, overall, and I just gave the list on the total losses for the Russian Air Force in recent months, that's a lot of losses. And that really does impact the ability of the Russian Air Force to maintain sufficient coverage around the front and to contest the airspace. I mean, we've talked about how F-16s are going to arrive in Ukraine at some point, maybe, at the end of this year, if not next year sometime. And so that is a significant add for the Ukrainian Air Force. So, of course, Ukraine's trying to kind of set the battlefield by targeting these kinds of early warning aircraft, these high payoff targets that, target air defense systems, as well as just generally degrade the VKS, the Russian Air Force, and take down aircraft that could also contest the airspace and target ground systems. That's not to say that once the F-16s are introduced, that again, the war just blows right open. You're probably still going to see a situation kind of like what we have right now, where the airspace is pretty well contested. There's generally parity, and there's not a lot of movement. However, we've already described how important the A-50 is to Russian forces and to identify long-range threats. And so this can be a bit of a problem for them moving forward if they're not able to protect the remaining fleet that they have. Now, all of this is happening shortly after the fall of Avdiivka, as Russian forces are continuing large-scale attacks across the city of Robotyne and a little bit to the west of Avdiivka. One of the main challenges that Ukraine has had up to this point is artillery ammunition shortages, and this is something that the UK is attempting to address with a recent deal that should send upwards of about 60,000 artillery shells to Ukraine. Now, that sounds kind of like a pretty big number. That's not. Consider that, in recent months, we've been discussing the movement of North Korean artillery shells to Russia. A report came out that Russia has consumed up to 1.5 million artillery shells from North Korea alone. That is a lot. So 60,000 artillery shells is kind of a flash in a pan. It's not a lot, and it will probably be consumed incredibly quickly. However, at the same time, it's better than nothing. It's better, to get, some amount of ammunition than it is to get nothing, right? So we'll continue to monitor and see what other deals are iced here. A few other European countries are also looking to kind of make up the difference for Ukrainian aid that's kind of being left wide open because of the U.S. congressional infighting regarding foreign aid. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But all told, I mean, it's the downing of the A-50 is a pretty good break for Ukraine. And we'll see what impact that has on the remainder of the VKS moving forward. So with all that said, let me know your thoughts about the A-50 shoot down and the impact that you think that this will have on the VKS and the Russian military, as well as the conflict. and tell me about what you think about Transnistria. I mean, it's some interesting news. I don't necessarily think anything's going to come of that, but at the same time, kind of got to note it because it's still in the region. It's still a security concern, not only for Ukraine, but also for Moldova. But it kind of leaves me in this position where I'm just kind of thinking like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like what will Russia actually do about it? What do they have the capability to do that would not, just kind of lead to significant losses of their own forces? So let me know what your thoughts are, and we will talk next time.